This week in Module 4, we've been focused on critical thinking, specifically the different types of logical fallacies often used in arguments. Basically, a logical fallacy is an argument that, on its surface, might look like it stands, but when you look a little closer, it starts to fall apart. One of the first things I'd like to point out is that just because someone uses a logical fallacy in their argument doesn't necessarily mean their conclusion is wrong. For example, if I was to say, Donald Trump is wrong that tariffs will improve our economy because he's a reality TV star and what does he know? That conclusion may still be correct, but the argument I'm using to support it doesn't hold up. I'd like to talk about the 3 fallacies we learned about, which I think are most prevalent in US culture and politics today. Firstly is the straw man fallacy. This is basically misrepresenting an opponent's argument, saying, my opponent believes X, when actually they believe Y. The second fallacy that I see very commonly today is the genetic fallacy. This is basically saying, if something was done for this reason in history, then if it's done today, it must be for the same reason. The third fallacy I'd like to point out I think may be the most common, the ad hominem fallacy, attacking a person's character and not their argument. For example, if I was to say that Bernie Sanders has the goal of creating a USSR-type communist regime in America today, that's simply demonstrably untrue. You can make legitimate criticisms of Bernie's policies, but you shouldn't misrepresent what his goals are. One example of this fallacy that I've seen very recently is in the gun control debate, with anti-gun control advocates saying, gun control was first proposed to disarm minorities. Therefore, since it's being proposed now, the goal is to disarm minorities. This just seems disingenuous to anyone who may be pro-gun control and only weakens your position with them. It would be much more effective to say, the current effect is still disarming minorities, and not try to portray that as the intended goal when it no longer is. For example, if someone were to interrupt you while you're watching this video and say, don't listen to Michael, he's got an ugly tie, that might hurt my feelings, but it's not a very good argument as to why you shouldn't watch this video. I think it's really telling that these are the 3 most common fallacies that I see around me today. The straw man and genetic fallacies are often about misrepresenting who your opponent is, what their beliefs are. The ad hominem is about directly attacking them and not attacking what they're actually saying. I think that these fallacies are so common today because people genuinely want to believe the worst about people that they see as their opponents. Whether it's a Republican needing to believe that the Democrats are as bad as Rush Limbaugh says they are, or it's a Democrat thinking that every Republican is an Alex Jones conspiracy theorist. The philosopher C.S. Lewis had a great quote concerning this topic in his book Mere Christianity. Suppose one reads a story of filthy atrocities in the paper. Then suppose that something turns up suggesting that the story might not be quite true, or not quite so bad as it was made out. Is one's first feeling, thank God, even they aren't quite so bad as that? Or is it a feeling of disappointment or even determination to cling to the first story for the sheer pleasure of thinking your enemies are as bad as possible? If it's the latter, then it is, I'm afraid, the first step in a process which, if followed to the end, will make us into devils. It's dangerous to be determined to believe the worst about our opponents. As C.S. Lewis points out later in the same book, if we're determined to see the worst in our opponents, eventually we'll be determined to see the worst in people who are neutral to us, and then to those who are supposed to be our allies. Eventually we become so full of determination to see the worst that the entire universe around us is seen as antagonistic. And that's not a good way to live, for anyone.